A farmer traded 2 chickens for a huge woman. What she did in the dark became a secret. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive into this story that's going to leave you absolutely speechless, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of our stories. And drop a comment telling me what state or country you're watching from. I love knowing where our community is tuning in from. Let's get into it. The laughter erupted across the entire auction when he reached out his hand, offering 2 scrawny chickens for that enormous woman standing nearly 6.5 feet tall. The other buyers nearly choked from laughing so hard. They said she was nothing but trouble, that no kind of work suited a creature that size, with those eyes like a cornered wild animal, and that history of destruction trailing behind her. They whispered she had broken overseers' bones, that she had burned down a tobacco barn, that she was cursed. But the farmer wasn't shaken by their mockery. He saw something nobody else could see, something that flickered behind those deep, rage-filled eyes. That very night, when the sun had already sunk behind the hills and darkness swallowed everything whole, he led her in silence to the old barn at the back of his property. Far from all eyes, far from all ears. It wasn't for hard labor that he was taking her there. It was for something else, something nobody could discover, something that would change both their lives forever. The auction happened on a sweltering morning in March of 1852 in the town square of Natchez, Mississippi, right in the heart of the Deep South. The air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The smell of cotton bales stacked on the docks mixed with the sharp odor of bodies crammed together, of sweat, of fear, of desperation. Dozens of plantation owners circled around the wooden platform where human beings were displayed like livestock, like cattle, like things without souls. The auctioneer running the sale was a short, pot-bellied fellow with a bald head gleaming with sweat and a shrill voice that grated on the ears. He presented each person with the exaggerated enthusiasm of someone selling prize horses at a county fair. He exalted qualities, hid defects, invented stories, anything to extract the highest price possible from those men in top hats and walking canes who circled the platform like vultures around carrion. When her turn came, a strange silence fell over the place. It wasn't a silence of admiration. It was a silence of discomfort, of unease, of fear even. The woman stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, maybe even taller. It was hard to tell for certain because she was hunched over, shoulders slumped forward, as if trying to appear smaller than she really was. But even so, it was impossible not to notice her size. Her shoulders were as broad as any man's there. Her hands were massive, with thick, calloused fingers. Her bare feet seemed to sink into the wooden platform with every step she took. The rough burlap cloth she wore barely concealed a body made entirely of bones and muscles, sculpted by hunger and years of punishment. There was no softness in that figure. She was all angles, all hardness, all resistance. Her head was shaved close to the scalp, revealing old scars that nobody dared ask how they came to be. But what drew the most attention were the eyes, 2 dark, deep wells that looked at no one. They were fixed on some point beyond the horizon, as if she inhabited another world, as if her body was there, but her soul had fled to somewhere nobody could reach. The auctioneer cleared his throat, adjusted his sweaty collar, and announced with an enthusiasm that wilted with every word. This one here goes by Josephine, 24 years of age, came from down around the Sea Islands of Georgia. Strong as an ox, this one. Can handle any heavy work. He paused, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, visibly uncomfortable. Only thing is, he cleared his throat again. No overseer has been able to break this one yet. She's been through 5 different plantations. 5, and at every single one she caused problems. Won't take orders from nobody. No good for field work because she fights with the others. No good for the kitchen because she broke the face of a house girl who looked at her wrong. No good for the main house because the mistress was scared to let her near the children. The auctioneer sighed, defeated. To be honest with you, gentlemen, this one's only good for causing losses, but maybe someone wants to try their luck, right? Who'll offer $10? Absolute silence. Nobody moved a muscle. $5? Nothing. Some planters even took a step back as if afraid that mere proximity to that woman might bring bad luck. $3? For the love of God, gentlemen, $3 for a piece this size? Silence. $1? One measly dollar? The planters were already starting to disperse, losing any interest. Some laughed quietly, making jokes about the cursed giantess. Others shook their heads, commenting that the auctioneer had made a terrible deal buying that creature from the trader. That's when a calm, measured voice from the back of the crowd cut through the morning heat. 2 chickens. Every head turned at once like puppets pulled by the same string. Who had said that? It was Ezekiel Crawford, owner of Hope's End Farm, a modest property nestled in the hills of Adams County, with about 200 acres of cotton and little more than 60 souls working it. A man pushing 60 years old, hair gone completely white, beard sparse and poorly trimmed, clothes worn but decent. His straw hat had holes in 2 places. His boots had seen better days. Ezekiel wasn't one of the wealthy ones. Everyone there knew that. He lived on the razor's edge, always owing the bank, always owing suppliers, always counting every penny to see if he'd make it to the end of the month. His property was known as one of the poorest in the region. They said he was one step away from losing everything. The other buyers looked at each other and burst out laughing, a loud, mocking, cruel laugh. 2 chickens, a fat planter repeated, holding his belly from laughing so hard. Old Ezekiel's finally lost his mind. Must be his age, another commented, wiping tears from his eyes. Going senile, the poor fool. 2 chickens for that worthless giantess, a third guffawed. Now that's throwing money away. The auctioneer, for his part, wasn't laughing. He was relieved. Desperately relieved. Anything was better than having to return that problematic merchandise to the trader and take a loss. He slammed the hammer down hard, nearly breaking the table. Sold for 2 chickens to Mr. Crawford. May the good Lord have mercy on his soul, because he's going to need all the divine help he can get. More laughter, more mockery, more scorn. Ezekiel showed nothing. No anger, no shame, no satisfaction. His face was a stone mask, impossible to read. He walked slowly to the platform, climbed the 3 creaking wooden steps, took hold of the rusted chain binding Josephine's ankle, and descended. She followed him in silence, her face completely empty of any expression. No curiosity, no fear, no hope, nothing. As if this were just another transfer, another plantation, another master who would try to break her and fail like all the others. They walked nearly 3 miles under that merciless sun. Ezekiel rode ahead on an old, tired mule that looked ready to collapse at any moment. The animal wheezed, stumbled on stones, but kept moving forward with the stubbornness of creatures that have seen everything life has to offer. Josephine walked behind, chained, her bare feet leaving trails of blood on the red dirt road. She didn't complain. She didn't groan. She didn't ask for water. She just walked, one step after another, eyes fixed on the back of the old man who was now her owner. Ezekiel didn't say a single word during the entire journey. He didn't look back even once. He didn't offer water, didn't offer rest, didn't offer explanation. He just pressed forward, guiding the mule down the dusty road as if he were completely alone. When they finally reached the property, the sun was already sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, crimson, and purple. Cicadas sang in the bushes. The smell of damp earth rose from the cotton fields stretching across the hillsides. It was beautiful, in a sad way. Beautiful the way only abandoned things can be. The farmhouse was a simple construction of weathered wood, with a porch and a tin roof. It needed paint, needed repairs, needed care. But it still stood. It still endured. Ezekiel dismounted with difficulty, his old joints protesting against the movement. He tied the mule to a post and signaled for Josephine to follow him. He didn't go toward the house. He didn't go toward the slave quarters. He went toward the barn, a spacious structure of dark wood at the back of the property, where he kept tools, sacks of grain, farm implements, and a few animals. He opened the heavy door, which creaked on its rusted hinges, and entered. Josephine entered behind him. Ezekiel closed the door and slid the bolt into place. They were alone, and here we're going to make that necessary pause. Because if you've gotten this far in the story, trying to figure out what this mysterious farmer intended to do with her in that isolated barn, far from all eyes, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now, turn on all notifications so you don't miss anything, and leave a comment telling me what city or state you're watching from. We love knowing who's on this journey with us. Your participation makes all the difference. Now back to the barn, where Ezekiel had just locked the door from the inside, and darkness was beginning to fill the space. Josephine remained planted in the center of the barn, her gaze still lost in the void, her body tense as a fiddle string about to snap. She didn't know what to expect. She had seen everything in these years of bondage. She had been forced to do things she preferred to forget. She had been beaten until she passed out, had starved until she hallucinated, had been locked in dark holes for days on end. Nothing surprised her anymore. Nothing scared her anymore. She had built a wall around her own heart, and nobody was going to tear that wall down. Nobody. Ezekiel walked slowly to a corner of the barn and lit a kerosene lamp. The weak flame grew stronger little by little, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The smell of burning oil mixed with the smell of dry straw and animal dung. The old man dragged a wooden crate to the center of the space, sat down with difficulty, and spent what seemed like an eternity observing Josephine. His eyes, brown and tired, traveled over her face, her shoulders, her hands, as if he were evaluating a tool, trying to figure out what it was good for. Josephine held his gaze. She didn't lower her eyes like the others did. She didn't show submission. She just waited, tense, ready to react at the first sign of threat. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Ezekiel broke the silence. His voice was hoarse, tired, but firm. "Can you read?" The question caught Josephine off guard, though she didn't show it. It wasn't the kind of question a master asked an enslaved person. It wasn't the kind of question she expected to hear there, in that dark barn, alone with a stranger. She didn't answer. She didn't move a muscle. Ezekiel waited a few seconds, then tried again. "Can you fight? Really fight? With technique?" This time something trembled in the corner of her eye, almost invisible, a tiny, involuntary tremor. But Ezekiel was a man who had spent his life observing the weather to know when to plant, observing animals to know when they were sick, observing people to know when they were lying. He saw that tremor, and he knew he had touched something. Without saying anything more, he rose from the crate with effort, went to a dark corner of the barn, and returned carrying a hunting knife. The blade was broad, well-maintained, sharp as a razor. The wooden handle was worn from decades of use. Ezekiel held the knife by the blade, careful not to cut himself, and extended the handle toward Josephine. "Take it." She didn't take it. Her eyes dropped to the knife, then rose to the old man's face, full of distrust. This could be a trap, a test, an excuse to punish her. "Take it," Ezekiel repeated, his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to put you in the fields. I have a different plan for you, but I need you to trust me, just a little, just for tonight. After that, you can decide what you want to do." Josephine remained motionless, her breathing controlled, her muscles tense. Ezekiel sighed deeply, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Then, slowly, he placed the knife on the dirt floor, right in the middle of the space between them, and took 2 steps back, 3, 4, until his back touched the barn wall. "There," he said. "If you want to kill me, you can. I'm unarmed. I'm old. I'm weak. I won't be able to defend myself. But if you want to hear what I have to say before deciding, sit over there." He pointed to a pile of dry straw heaped in a corner, which served as bedding for the animals. Josephine looked at the knife on the floor, looked at the old man pressed against the wall, looked at the locked door. She thought about grabbing the weapon and ending it all right there. It would be easy. It would be quick. Just another dead master, another burned plantation, another desperate flight into the night. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the exhaustion of so many years of running. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the fact that this man had done something no other master had ever done, put himself in a position of vulnerability before her. Slowly, very slowly, Josephine ignored the knife on the floor and walked to the straw. She sat with her knees drawn up against her chest, arms wrapped around her legs, the defensive posture of someone who has spent a lifetime waiting for the next blow. Ezekiel watched her settle in and managed a tired, sad smile. "Good," he said quietly. "That's something. That's a start." He returned to the crate, sat down again with difficulty, and began to speak. His voice was low, almost a murmur, as if he were telling secrets he had never told anyone. "Let me tell you something that nobody else in this world knows, something I've kept inside for 12 years, eating away at my heart like termites in rotten wood." He paused, took a deep breath, and continued. 12 years ago, I had a son, an only son. His name was Samuel. He was a boy of 16, full of life, strong, fearless. He had his mother's smile and his father's stubbornness. He was good at work, good at conversation, good at heart. He was my reason for getting out of bed every single day, understand? He was my reason for continuing to fight against this ungrateful land, against these cursed debts, against this world that seems like it was made to crush people like us. Ezekiel's eyes grew moist, but he didn't let the tears fall. He swallowed hard and continued. "One day we went to town to get supplies, just him and me. It was a trip we made every month, no problems. But that day, on the way back, when it was already getting dark, some men crossed our path. Bandits, highwaymen, 4 wretches armed with knives and clubs wanting to rob our wagon." His voice faltered. He needed a few seconds to be able to continue. Samuel was too brave for his own good. When he saw they were going to hurt me, he jumped in front, tried to protect me. Took a knife to the chest, right here. Ezekiel touched his own chest on the left side, where the heart beats. I carried him in my arms for 2 miles. 2 miles running, stumbling, crying, praying. But he died before we got home. Died in my arms, looking at me, apologizing for not being able to save me. Apologizing, understand? The boy who died to protect me, apologizing to me. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Josephine watched the old man with an expression that had changed subtly. She was still distrustful, still hard, But there was something more there now, a recognition, a spark of understanding. Ezekiel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and continued, his voice firmer now. After that, this farm became a burden. Every corner of this property reminds me of him. Every cotton plant, every tool, every stone. My wife couldn't bear the pain. She wasted away little by little, like a candle melting, until the fever took her 3 years later. I was left alone, just me, this cursed land, and an enormous debt to Colonel Whitmore, the most powerful man in these parts. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. The colonel lent me money to plant when I was desperate. It seemed like kindness at the time, but it was a trap. The harvests have been disasters ever since. Boll weevils 1 year, drought the next, low prices the year after. I could never pay properly. The debt kept growing. Today I owe him $15,000. $15,000. That's more money than I'll ever see in my entire life. Ezekiel shook his head, defeated. If I don't pay by the end of this year, he takes everything. The land, the house, the animals, the people who work here, everything. I'll end my days as a beggar at the church door, if I even end my days at all, because I might throw myself in the river before I give the colonel that satisfaction. Josephine continued in silence, absorbing every word. Ezekiel looked directly at her and continued, Colonel Whitmore has a daughter, Victoria, 23 years old, a young woman different from any other I've ever known. She's not the type who stays home embroidering, waiting for a husband. No, she likes to ride horses, to hunt, to fight, and she loves gambling. Everyone knows it. It's the talk of the entire region. The old man became a bit more animated, his voice gaining energy. Every year, always in December, Victoria organizes a competition at her father's plantation, a fighting tournament. Fighters from the entire region go there to compete. Boxing, wrestling, bare knuckle, any style goes. Huge men, trained, brutal, and she sits there watching, betting fortunes, enjoying the violence. He paused dramatically. Whoever wins all the fights and emerges champion takes home $20,000. Ezekiel let the number hang in the air for a moment. $20,000, Josephine. Do you understand what that means? It's more than what I owe. It's enough to pay off my debt, renovate this entire farm, buy new equipment, hire workers, and still have plenty left to live comfortably for another decade. It's the difference between surviving and sinking for good. Josephine frowned, her eyes finally showing some emotion, confusion. Why are you telling me this? She asked. The voice came out hoarse, scratchy, from someone who hadn't had proper water in days. It was the first time she had spoken since arriving at the farm. Ezekiel smiled. A small smile, but genuine. Because I saw you at that auction, Josephine. I saw the way you move, the strength in those broad shoulders, the tension in those muscles, the fire hidden in those eyes. You're not worthless, like that crooked auctioneer wanted everyone to believe. You're a fighter. You always have been, born for it, but nobody ever gave you the chance to use it to your advantage. He stood up from the crate and began pacing back and forth, gesturing as he spoke. I asked around about you before the auction, did my research, found out you broke an overseer's arm when he tried to whip you, found out you put 3 drivers to flight when they cornered you in a barn, found out you faced 5 men at once and walked away standing while they were carried off. You're a weapon, Josephine, a weapon that spent its entire life being used wrong. He stopped pacing and stood facing her. I want to train you. I want to take that raw strength you have and transform it into technique. I want to prepare you to enter that colonel's tournament. I want to give you the chance to really fight, with rules, with an audience, with a prize at the end. Josephine stared at him, processing every word. And what do I get out of this? She asked, the distrust still evident. Ezekiel nodded as if he had expected the question. If you win, I split the prize with you. Half for me, half for you. $10,000. That's enough money for me to pay off my debt and keep the farm. And it's enough money for you to buy your freedom papers and still have a fortune left over to start a new life wherever you want. North, South, Canada, anywhere. Wherever you want. He paused, letting the words settle. Freedom, Josephine. Freedom bought with your own sweat, your own strength, your own fight. Not given as a gift by some kind white man. Earned. Yours. Forever. Josephine was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the barn wall. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower. And if I lose? Ezekiel shrugged, not hiding the reality. Then we lose together. I lose the farm to the colonel. You go back to the auction block, probably sold to someone even worse. But at least we tried. At least we went down fighting instead of lying down and waiting for the end. She stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes trying to find the lie, the trap, the trick. Why should I trust you? she finally asked. You're just another master, another white man, another one who wants to use my body to gain something. Ezekiel wasn't offended by the words. He just nodded, acknowledging the truth in them. You're right. You shouldn't trust me. There's no reason to trust. I'm a stranger who bought you for 2 chickens at an auction. The only thing I can offer you is my word, and I know a white man's word means nothing to you. I understand. He sat back down on the crate, his old bones complaining at the movement. But answer me one thing, Josephine. Do you have another option? Any better alternative? If you do, I'll open this door right now and you can go. I won't stop you, but if you don't, if the only thing waiting for you out there is more chains, more whips, more humiliation, then maybe, just maybe, it's worth risking trust in a broke old man who has nothing left to lose. Josephine looked down at her own clenched fists. Enormous hands, calloused, covered in scars. Each mark told a story of pain, of resistance, of struggle. She thought about the 5 plantations she had passed through, the overseers who had tried to break her with the lash, with hunger, with humiliation and worse things, the nights chained in fetid quarters, dreaming of a freedom that seemed impossible, unreachable, a child's fantasy. She didn't trust Ezekiel. She didn't trust anyone. She had learned early that trusting meant putting yourself in a position to be hurt, but he was right. She had no choice, no alternative. It was this or return to the endless cycle of bondage, violence, and despair, and something in that man's voice, an honest exhaustion, a pain she recognized, a loneliness that echoed her own, made her consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. All right, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. I'll fight. Ezekiel visibly relaxed, releasing a sigh of relief. But, Josephine continued, her eyes meeting his, if you betray me, if this is a lie, if you're planning something, I'll kill you, and it won't be quick. Ezekiel held her gaze without flinching. Fair enough, he said. Deal. They began the next day, before sunrise. Ezekiel woke Josephine when the sky was still dark, sprinkled with stars. He led her along a winding trail deep into the woods, climbing the hillside for nearly an hour, until they reached a hidden clearing in the middle of dense vegetation, a place nobody knew, far from any curious eyes. Protected by rocks and ancient oak trees, there he improvised a training arena. He tied thick ropes between tree trunks, marking off a square space. He brought burlap sacks filled with sand for her to punch. He stacked logs of different sizes for her to break with her hands, elbows, and knees. He hung branches at different heights for her to practice dodging. In the first weeks, Ezekiel just observed. He didn't give orders, didn't correct, didn't interfere. He just sat on a tree stump and studied every movement Josephine made, the way she punched the bags with all the accumulated rage of a lifetime of injustice, the way she dodged by pure instinct, her body reacting before her mind could process, the way she breathed, how she distributed her weight, how she recovered her balance after each blow. She was raw, savage, undisciplined. Each attack was a scream of fury, an uncontrolled explosion of accumulated violence. There was no technique, no strategy, no economy of movement, just pure rage transformed into physical force. But there was potential, enormous potential, greater than anything Ezekiel had ever seen. She had surprising speed for someone her size, superhuman resistance to pain, a determination bordering on obsession. And above all, she had hunger, hunger to win, hunger to prove her worth, hunger to conquer something that had always been denied to her. After 3 weeks of observing, Ezekiel began to teach. He had kept, since his youth, some old books on boxing that he had bought from an English sailor decades ago, worn volumes with yellowed pages and faded illustrations showing guard positions, types of punches, defense techniques, combat strategies. He didn't know how to apply any of it. He was too old, too weak, had never been a fighter. But he knew how to read, knew how to explain, knew how to show the pictures and translate the concepts into words Josephine could understand. And she absorbed everything like parched earth finally receiving rain after a long drought. Every technique, every concept, every detail. She practiced obsessively, repeating the same movements hundreds of times until they became automatic, natural, part of her own body. Ezekiel also brought other resources. Through favors and debts, he arranged for a former soldier living in a nearby town to come once a week to train grappling with her. The man, a quiet fellow marked by scars, asked no questions. He just taught what he knew, pocketed the payment, and left. He also arranged for a retired sailor, who had traveled the world and seen every kind of combat, to come teach techniques that weren't in any book. Dirty tricks, survival tactics, ways to use size and weight to her advantage. The routine was brutal. Josephine woke before dawn, trained for 4, 5, 6 hours in the clearing, then returned to the farm and helped with the harvest for the rest of the day, to keep up appearances, so nobody would suspect what was really happening. She ate what she could, when she could, slept a few hours, and the next day started all over again. The months passed. Autumn gave way to winter, which gave way to spring, and Josephine transformed. The muscles, which before were just raw mass shaped by forced labor, gained precise definition. Every fiber of her body seemed to have been sculpted for a specific purpose. The movements, which before were chaotic explosions of violence, became precise, economical, lethal. Her posture changed, her gaze changed, even the way she walked changed, each step carrying a confidence that hadn't existed before. And something deeper changed as well. The rage she carried, that blind, uncontrolled fury that made her untamable, but also unpredictable, began to take shape. It began to be channeled, directed, controlled. It didn't disappear, far from it. The rage was still there, burning in her gut like a fire that never went out. But now she knew how to use that rage. She knew how to transform it into fuel, into technique, into power. Ezekiel watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He knew he was creating something dangerous, a weapon that, if pointed in the wrong direction, could destroy everything around it. But he also knew he was creating something extraordinary, something the world had never seen, something that was going to change that woman's history forever. In October, with just 2 months until the tournament, Ezekiel decided it was time to test her progress. He took Josephine to the clearing as he did every day, but this time he didn't sit watching. He rose from the stump, removed his worn coat, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and entered the improvised arena. "Today you're going to fight me," he announced. Josephine looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "You're old. I'm going to hurt you." "I know," he said, raising his fists in a clumsy guard position. "But I need to feel how you fight. Need to see it up close. Come on." She hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and advanced. Ezekiel lasted 8 seconds. She took him down with a simple combination. A jab to distract, followed by a cross that caught him square on the chin. The old man fell on his back, the air escaping from his lungs, stars exploding in front of his eyes. For a moment, everything went dark. When his vision cleared, he saw Josephine's face leaning over him, her expression worried. "Are you okay?" Ezekiel coughed, spat blood on the ground, and began to laugh. A hoarse, pained, but genuine laugh. "You're ready," he said between coughs. "For the love of God, Josephine, you're more than ready." The tournament took place in the first week of December, as it did every year. Colonel Whitmore's plantation was decorated as if it were a royal ball, colored lanterns hanging in every corner, tables laden with foods and drinks that the workers of the region had never even dreamed of tasting, musicians playing live on an improvised bandstand, ladies in hooped dresses strolled arm in arm with their husbands in top hats, children ran between the adults' legs. Traveling vendors offered sweets and trinkets, but at the center of it all, surrounded by wooden bleachers already packed with spectators, was what really mattered: the fighting ring. It was an elevated platform, built with thick planks, surrounded by ropes. 4 enormous torches illuminated the space, creating a circle of light in the middle of the night's darkness. The floor of the ring was covered with sawdust to absorb the blood that would certainly be spilled, and in the main box, in a red velvet armchair positioned for the best possible view, sat Victoria Whitmore, the colonel's daughter. She was exactly as the stories described, a young woman, perhaps 23 or 24 years old, with an aggressive beauty. Her black hair was pulled up in an elaborate bun. Her eyes were dark as pieces of coal and had the same hardness. She wore a scarlet red dress, low cut in a way that would scandalize any respectable lady. In her gloved hands, she held a fan that she used more for pointing than for fanning herself. She watched the crowd with a half smile, like a queen observing her subjects. Every now and then, she leaned to the side to whisper something in the ear of one of the men surrounding her, and they laughed loudly, too eager to please. When Ezekiel arrived with Josephine, the murmuring stopped. Every head turned, every eye fixed on the gigantic figure walking beside the old farmer. And then, the laughter began. "Look at that," someone shouted from the middle of the crowd. "Ezekiel brought the giantess from the 2-chicken auction. She's going to fight against men?" Another bellowed. "This I've got to see. Poor thing, she won't last 1 round. I'll bet $10 she goes down on the first punch." The laughter spread like waves, echoing across the entire plantation. Planters pointed, merchants mocked, even some ladies covered their mouths to hide malicious smiles. Josephine didn't react. She kept her face impassive, eyes fixed straight ahead, walking with the same unwavering posture she had developed in months of training. Ezekiel wasn't shaken either. He went straight to the registration table, paid the entry fee with the last coins he had in the world, and registered Josephine as a competitor. The official in charge looked at her, looked at him, and shrugged. "It's your choice. When she dies, it's not our fault." "Agreed," Ezekiel responded dryly, and led Josephine to the fighters' waiting area. The first fight happened when the bell rang, marking the start of the tournament. Josephine's opponent was a blacksmith from Vicksburg, a monstrous man, 280 pounds of pure mass, neck thick as a tree trunk, fists that looked like iron hammers. He had won the last 3 tournaments in a row and was the overwhelming favorite to win again. The crowd was betting on him 10-1. When he climbed into the ring and saw he was going to face a woman, he laughed out loud. "Is this a joke?" he said, looking at the judges. "I'm going to hurt this poor thing." The judges shrugged. The rules didn't prohibit women from competing. None had ever been foolish enough to try. Josephine climbed into the ring from the other side. She was barefoot, wearing cotton pants and a white shirt tied at the waist. No gloves, no protection, nothing but her own body and 24 years of rage. The bell rang. The blacksmith advanced with confidence, a mocking smile on his face, already thinking about how he was going to humiliate that woman in front of everyone. Josephine waited. He threw a straight punch, strong enough to knock down an ox. She dodged at the last instant, spun her body in a fluid movement, and landed a devastating hook to his ribs. The sound of bone cracking echoed across the entire plantation. The blacksmith froze, eyes wide with shock, mouth open in a scream that couldn't come out. Then, slowly, like a centuries-old tree being felled, he collapsed to his knees, gasping, hands trying to protect the side of his body that had just been destroyed. The referee began the count. The blacksmith couldn't get up. Technical knockout in 35 seconds. The crowd fell into absolute silence for a moment. Nobody could believe what they had just seen. Then, a murmur began to spread, growing like a wave, mixing shock, indignation, and in some cases, reluctant admiration. Up in the box, Victoria Whitmore leaned forward in her chair, her dark eyes gleaming with an interest that hadn't been there before. The second fight was against a fighter from New Orleans, an agile, fast, treacherous man. He danced around the ring with the grace of a snake, applying sweeps, spinning kicks, blows that came from impossible angles. Josephine took some hits. A cut opened above her left eyebrow. A bruise began forming on her right thigh, but she didn't fall. She absorbed the punishment, studied her opponent's rhythm, waited for the opening. When she finally caught the pattern of his movements, she advanced like a runaway locomotive. A jab to force his guard. A cross he managed to dodge. And then, when he spun to counterattack, an uppercut that rose from the ground and caught him square on the chin. The fighter went out before he hit the ground. The third fight was against a former soldier from the Mexican-American War, a middle-aged man, thin but wiry, with eyes that had seen and done terrible things. He didn't have the brute strength of the other opponents, but he had technique, he had experience. He had the cold cruelty of someone who learned to kill on battlefields. The fight lasted 5 minutes. 5 minutes of hell. He broke Josephine's nose in the second round. Blood gushed, running down her chin, dripping onto the floor of the ring. He nearly dislocated her shoulder in the third. She screamed in pain but didn't stop. In the end, she won on points, but not before breaking 4 of his ribs, cracking 2 knuckles of her right hand, and leaving one of his eyes so swollen he couldn't open it. When she reached the final, the sun had long since set. The ring was illuminated only by the torches, which cast dancing shadows in all directions. The crowd was in tense silence, divided between disbelief that this woman had come so far and certainty that she would finally meet her match. Josephine stood in the corner of the ring, waiting for her last opponent. The blood from her broken nose had dried, forming a dark crust on her face. Her shoulder throbbed with each breath. Her muscles trembled with exhaustion, but she was still standing, still ready. And then the last opponent climbed into the ring, and Josephine understood why everyone was so certain she was going to lose. His name was Solomon. He was the son of a slave trader, raised to be a monster from the day he was born. 6 feet 7 inches tall, 350 pounds of pure muscle. He had killed 7 men in underground fights, not out of necessity, but for pleasure. His face was a mask of scars, his gaze empty like that of a predator. He looked at Josephine as if she were prey, an insect, something to be crushed and forgotten. Victoria Whitmore rose from her box for the first time all night and descended to the edge of the ring. She stood a few feet from Josephine, her dark eyes studying every detail of that bloodied woman who refused to fall. "Are you brave or crazy?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and something like respect. Josephine didn't respond. She kept her eyes fixed on Solomon, calculating, evaluating, preparing. Victoria smiled, a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you win, I want to hire you. Working for me, you'd have a life you never imagined." Josephine finally looked at her. For a long moment, the two women stared at each other, so different in everything but somehow recognizing something in one another. Then Josephine spat blood on the floor of the ring. "I'm not for sale." The bell rang. The fight began. Solomon was a freak of nature. Every punch he threw was like an explosion. The air displaced, the entire ring seemed to shake. If any of those blows connected solidly, the fight would be over. Josephine would be carried from the ring in pieces. She knew that, so she didn't let him connect. She dodged. She circled. She counterattacked where she could. Quick blows to the ribs, to the kidneys, to any opening that appeared. None of her blows seemed to make a difference. Solomon absorbed the punishment as if it were tickles, without slowing his pace, without showing pain. The first round ended with Josephine bleeding more, moving slower, clearly at a disadvantage. The second round was worse. Exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. Her reflexes were slower, her dodges less precise. Solomon landed a cross to the side of her head that made everything spin. She staggered, almost fell, recovered her balance at the last second. In the third round, he connected the blow everyone had been waiting for. A monstrous uppercut, rising from the hip with all the force of that colossal body, catching Josephine right under the chin. Her head was thrown back, her body hurled against the ropes, her eyes rolling. She fell. The crowd exploded. Shouts, applause, celebrations. Bettors ran to collect their winnings. Solomon himself raised his arms in triumph, roaring at the sky. Ezekiel, glued to the edge of the ring, felt the world collapse. It was all over. The farm, the hope, everything. But then, for some reason he couldn't explain, he found himself shouting with all the strength he still had in his old lungs. "Get up! For Samuel, Josephine! For your freedom! Get up!" Josephine heard his voice through the fog of pain that enveloped everything. The name Samuel meant nothing to her. It was the dead son of an old man she barely knew. But the word freedom, that word cut through the darkness like a blade of fire. Freedom. That was why she was here. That was why she had endured months of brutal training. That was why she had let that monster break her nose, nearly dislocate her shoulder, beat her until she bled. Freedom. In the darkness of near unconsciousness, images flashed through Josephine's mind like lightning. The 5 plantations, the overseers with whips, the nights chained in fetid quarters, the humiliations, the violence, the times she had wanted to die just so the pain would stop. And then a rage she thought she had channeled, had controlled, had transformed into technique. Awakened. Not the controlled rage of training, the original rage. The primal fury, the roar of a beast that refuses to be tamed. She stood up. The referee was at the count of 7. The crowd had gone silent, shocked. Solomon, who was already celebrating, stopped mid-turn and looked at her with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Stay down, woman," he growled. "I'll kill you if you get up." Josephine spat blood, adjusted her stance, raised her fists. "Come try." He came. He advanced like an enraged bull, determined to finish it once and for all. His fists flew one after another, each blow carrying enough force to knock down walls. But something had changed in Josephine. The pain was still there. The exhaustion was still there. But something else had awakened. Something she had spent her entire life suffocating, hiding, trying to extinguish. She dodged the first punch by inches. The second too. Solomon grew irritated, accelerated his pace, became more aggressive, more careless, and that's when she saw it. The opening. The moment. He threw a right cross, too hard, too fast. He lost his balance for a fraction of a second. Josephine planted her feet on the floor of the ring, rotated her hips, channeled all the rage, all the pain, all the lifetime of suffering into a single movement. The ascending punch left the ground, rose through her body like an electric current, and struck Solomon right in the center of his chin. The sound was like thunder. Solomon froze. His eyes rolled back in their sockets, showing only white. His massive body swayed for 1 second. 2 seconds. Then, like a mountain collapsing in slow motion, he fell. The floor of the ring shook with the impact. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The night itself seemed suspended, waiting to see if this was real. And then, like a dam breaking, The crowd exploded, deafening screams, frantic applause, people jumping, hugging strangers, throwing hats in the air. Some cried without knowing why. Others simply screamed, needing to release an emotion they couldn't name. Ezekiel stumbled through the crowd, climbed into the ring with difficulty, and embraced Josephine with all the strength his old arms could muster. She could barely stay on her feet. Her entire body was shaking. Blood flowed from at least half a dozen wounds, but she was smiling. For the first time in years, decades perhaps, she was truly smiling. Victoria Whitmore descended from her box and walked to the ring. The crowd parted for her to pass, like waves moving away from a rock. She carried a heavy, full brown leather bag. $20,000, she said, extending the bag to Ezekiel. As promised, Ezekiel took the bag with trembling hands. He opened it, looked inside, counted mentally. Everything was there. A fortune, a lifetime of debts resolved in a single night. He closed the bag, took out half the contents, and placed it in Josephine's hands. "Your share," he said. His voice choked. As agreed, Josephine looked at the money in her hands. More money than she had ever seen in her life. More money than she could imagine. And it was hers, earned with her own sweat, with her own strength, with her own fight. The tears came before she could stop them. They fell silently, mixing with the dried blood on her face, creating pinkish trails on her dark skin. Ezekiel placed his hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow we go to the courthouse. I'm going to sign your freedom papers. You're going to be free, Josephine. Truly free." She looked at him, her eyes still glistening, and asked the only thing she needed to ask. "Why did you do this? Why did you bet on me when nobody else would?" Ezekiel was silent for a moment, looking at the blood-stained ring, at the crowd still in ecstasy, at Solomon's unconscious body being carried away. "Because you deserved a chance," he said finally. "Because I looked at you at that auction and saw someone the whole world had given up on, just like the world had given up on me. And I thought, if we're disposable to everyone else, at least we could try not to be disposable to each other." He shrugged, a simple gesture that carried the weight of an entire lifetime. "And because I needed you, you needed me. We found each other at the right moment. I guess we saved each other." 3 months later, on a sunny morning in March, Josephine left Natchez. She carried with her $10,000 kept in a leather bag strapped to her body, new clothes she had bought at the best store in town, and freedom papers filed at the courthouse, signed by Ezekiel Crawford in the presence of 2 witnesses and the clerk himself. Ezekiel accompanied her to the main road, where a stagecoach waited to take her north. They stood there for a moment, not quite knowing what to say. After months of living together, training, fighting side by side, words seemed too small. Finally, Josephine broke the silence. "You saved my life." Ezekiel shook his head. "You saved your own life. I just gave you the tools. You saw me," she insisted. "When everyone else looked and only saw something broken, you saw a person. That's not nothing. That's everything." He didn't respond. He simply extended his hand. Josephine looked at his hand for a moment. Then, instead of shaking it, she embraced him. A strong, awkward hug that nearly squeezed the air from the old man's lungs. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, without looking back, she climbed into the stagecoach and departed. Ezekiel stood on the road until the carriage disappeared over the horizon. Then, slowly, he returned to the farm. He paid off the debt to Colonel Whitmore that same week. The look on the colonel's face when he saw all that money, in cash, was worth more than any victory. Ezekiel renovated the house, repaired the equipment, hired free workers to help with the harvest. Hope's End Farm, for the first time in decades, lived up to its name. He never saw Josephine again. But 30 years later, when Ezekiel Crawford died of old age, quiet in his own bed, surrounded by a peace he had earned after much suffering, they found a letter on his bedside table. The envelope was yellowed, worn at the edges, clearly handled many times over the years. Inside, a single sheet of paper, written in careful handwriting that had taken years to learn. The letter was from Josephine. She had traveled north after leaving Natchez, passed through Memphis, through Cincinnati, through Philadelphia. She met people, learned things, discovered a world she never knew existed. Eventually, she settled in Boston, where she used the money she had saved to open a school. Not just any school, a school for girls. Girls the world had discarded just as she had been discarded. Girls everyone said were good for nothing. Girls who needed someone to look at them and see something beyond what others saw. The school taught reading, writing, arithmetic, but it also taught fighting, self-defense, never ever bowing your head to anyone who wanted to step on you. The letter that Ezekiel kept for 30 years said only this: "Thank you for seeing me when no one else could. You gave me more than freedom. You gave me back myself. Now I pass on what you gave me. Every girl I teach is a seed you planted. even without knowing. I hope you found the peace you deserve. Until we meet again, old friend, Jay. So, everyone, what did you think of this story? If it moved you, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. Comment below what you felt, what touched you most in this narrative. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story of overcoming the odds, share it right now. See you in the next one. Take care.